Iran destroyed a $270 million AWACS. Claim KO, credible public reporting SE, verify Nahinkar Saka. The stronger, defensible anchor right now is the reported destruction of a roughly $300 million and /TPY, 2 radar in Jordan, which officials and reporting say was critical to U.S. missile defense coverage in the region. Online AWACS loss claims appear unverified. People online are shouting that America just lost its eyes over the Gulf. And that line is powerful for a reason, because whether you're talking about an AWACS in the air or a radar on the ground, the point is the same. Eyes are not just hardware. Eyes are time. Eyes are warning. Eyes are the few extra minutes that turn panic into interception. And when those eyes go dark, even for a moment, the entire system starts feeling slower, heavier, and a lot less certain. Now here's the part most people are getting wrong. I could not verify the viral claim that Iran destroyed a $270 million US AWACS. What is publicly and credibly reported is that Iran destroyed a key US and /TPY, 2 radar in Jordan, a system worth about $300 million that helps direct missile defenses in the region. And if you understand what that radar does, you understand why this is still a huge deal. Because this is not just a headline about one expensive piece of equipment. This is a story about what happens when the most powerful military system in the world takes a hit in the one place it hates, taking hits most: awareness. That's the real story. And it matters for 3 reasons. First, losing a radar like this doesn't just remove a machine. It shrinks warning time. Second, it puts more pressure on every other layer of regional missile defense. And third, it tells Iran, and everybody else watching, that America's protective architecture in the Gulf is not untouchable. That is the piece you should pay attention to. Because wars are not only about who can hit harder. They're also about who can make the other side feel blind, late, and overloaded. And when a radar this important gets knocked out, even if the rest of the network stays standing, the message is clear. The shield can be stressed. Let's anchor the incident fast so there's no confusion. Bloomberg reported that Iran destroyed a key U.S. radar used to direct missile defense batteries in the Gulf, citing a U.S. official. And that satellite photos showed the /TPY, 2 radar and support equipment destroyed at Muwafaqat Salti Air Base in Jordan. Other reporting has described the same loss as a serious blow to regional missile defense coverage. That's the concrete event, not a vague rumor, not a dramatic internet claim with no proof. A real, strategic hit to a system that helps the U.S. see missile threats sooner and direct defenses more effectively. And if you want to understand why that matters, you have to stop thinking about radar as a giant antenna and start thinking about it as time. That's what advanced radar really buys you. Time to detect, time to track, time to classify, time to decide, time to fire an interceptor before the threat gets too close. And when you lose that, you don't just lose a machine. You lose breathing room. That's reason number 1. America didn't just lose metal. It lost margin. That's the punchline. Because missile defense in the Gulf is not a one-button movie scene where someone presses launch and the sky magically gets cleaned up. It is a chain. Sensors detect. Systems share data. Command centers prioritize threats. Interceptors are assigned. Crews respond. Timelines compress. Every second matters. And when one of the most powerful sensors in that chain disappears, the rest of the chain gets uglier. Not broken, necessarily, but uglier. Slower decisions. Fewer clean tracks. More burden on backup systems. Less confidence that the first warning is the right warning. And in a war where Iran has already shown it can throw missiles, drones, and regional pressure at multiple targets at once, that matters a lot. AP has reported on continuing Iranian strikes across the region, while the UAE said its air defenses had already engaged hundreds of ballistic and cruise missiles and more than 1,000 UAVs since the escalation began. That tells you the environment these systems are operating in is already crowded and stressed. Now let's get to reason number 2, because this is where the average viewer usually underestimates the story. When one critical radar goes down, pressure does not disappear. It moves. That means every surviving sensor, every interceptor battery, every command node, every allied radar, every regional operator now has to absorb a little more uncertainty and a little more workload. And that is exactly how layered defense starts feeling less like a wall and more like a juggling act. This is what strong militaries hate. Not just damage, redistributed stress. Because redistributed stress is where mistakes live. The public hears the US still has plenty of capability, and that may be true. But capability is not the same as comfort. You can still have formidable systems and yet be forced into worse timelines, worse angles, worse allocation decisions, and worse public messaging if a key sensor goes offline. That's why this hit matters beyond Jordan. It pushes on the whole architecture. And here's the concrete example that makes the point. The and /TPY-2 is used alongside missile defense systems like THAAD to help detect and track incoming threats at long range. Reporting says the destroyed radar was crucial to directing U.S. missile defense batteries in the Gulf. So even if the region still has other radars, ships, aircraft, and interceptors, taking out one of the most important early warning nodes is not cosmetic. It changes the burden sharing inside the network. That's the punchline for reason 2. One hit can make everything else work harder. And once everything else is working harder, the system becomes more expensive to sustain, more difficult to explain, and more vulnerable to saturation if the conflict intensifies. Now, reason number 3 is the biggest one, because this is where hardware becomes politics. This hit tells Iran that America's regional architecture can be reached, and that matters almost as much as the damage itself. Because wars run on confidence. Confidence in deterrence. Confidence in warning time. Confidence in allied coverage. Confidence that the expensive systems you build will keep shaping the fight the way they were designed to shape it. When that confidence takes a visible hit, the effect spreads far beyond the blast zone. Allies notice. Markets notice. Commanders notice. And your adversary definitely notices. That is why this is bigger than a price tag. The internet loves big numbers. 270 million, 300 million, a billion. But the real cost is not the sticker. The real cost is what the loss teaches everyone watching. It teaches that the network can be punched. It teaches that regional bases are not just launch pads, they are targets. And it teaches that Iran's strategy is not simply to trade missiles for missiles. It is to make US superiority feel more expensive, more stretched, and less clean than advertised. That's the real game. And if that sounds familiar, it should. This is how weaker or more constrained powers fight stronger ones. They don't erase the gap. They widen the bill. They make the stronger side spend more time, more money, more attention, more interceptors, and more political capital just to preserve the image of control. That is asymmetric pressure. And it works precisely because modern military power has a branding problem. The sales pitch is precision and dominance. The reality is friction, time, weather, volume, human decisions, distributed threats, and now, apparently, a region where even a key American sensor can be destroyed. That is the ugly reveal. Now, to be fair, let's add the counterpoint, because this matters if you want the analysis to stay credible. One radar going down does not mean America is blind. It does not mean the entire U.S. missile defense network in the region has collapsed. It does not mean Iran suddenly owns the sky. The U.S. still has multiple layers of detection and defense across ships, aircraft, bases, and allies. And recent reporting also shows a heavy U.S. focus on deploying and surging airborne surveillance and missile defense assets into the wider theater. That distinction matters, because the serious point is not that America has no eyes left. The serious point is that one of its most important eyes just got taken away in the middle of a war. And that changes behavior. It changes planning. It changes how confidently officials can talk about coverage. It changes how many resources the U.S. may have to divert into protecting sensors instead of simply using them. And it changes how allies think about risk if the conflict keeps widening. That's why this story has viral energy. Not because it proves some cartoon version of American collapse. It doesn't. But because it exposes something people instinctively understand. Even powerful systems have nerves. And once an enemy finds those nerves, every next round gets more complicated. That's also why the AWACS rumor spread so fast. Because people already understand the metaphor. Eyes over the Gulf. Flying radar. Warning time. Control. Even if the AWACS-specific claim is unverified, the reason it grabbed attention is that the underlying fear feels plausible. The fear is that America's awareness network is being chewed at the edges, and that the cost of staying dominant in this fight is rising faster than expected. And honestly, that fear is not irrational. Because look at the wider context. AP and other outlets have described a region already under intense strain, with Iranian strikes, maritime risk, oil pressure, and U.S. requests for allied help colliding with hesitation from multiple governments. This is not a clean battlefield. It is a crowded, political, economically sensitive arena where every successful strike does more than damage equipment. It multiplies doubt. That's what this radar hit really did. It multiplied doubt. Doubt about warning timelines. Doubt about defensive resilience. Doubt about how long the U.S. can keep reassuring everyone that the architecture is solid while absorbing repeated pressure across the region. And here's the hardest truth in the whole story. In modern war, systems don't have to fully fail to start losing psychological ground. They just have to look a little less certain than they did yesterday. That's it. A little less certain. A little slower. A little more expensive. A little more exposed. And suddenly the other side feels momentum, even if the battlefield balance is still overwhelmingly in America's favor. That's why this loss matters so much. Not because one radar decides the war, but because it reveals the kind of war this is becoming. A war where Iran doesn't need to beat the United States head-on. It just needs to keep finding ways to turn American strength into an expensive maintenance problem, an expensive reassurance problem, an expensive coordination problem. And when you hit the eyes of the system, that strategy starts looking a lot more dangerous than people expected. So no, I'm not going to tell you a fairy tale and pretend the verified story is that Iran destroyed a $270 million AWACS. I can't prove that. What I can tell you is that credible reporting says Iran destroyed a roughly $300 million U.S. missile defense radar in Jordan, and that is already big enough to matter. Because whether the eye is airborne or fixed on the ground, the principle is the same. If you can damage how America sees, you can damage how fast America decides. And if you can damage how fast America decides, you can make every promise of protection across the Gulf feel a little less absolute than it sounded the day before. That is the real story. And that is why people are paying attention now.